1 Timothy chapter 5. Somebody read 1 through 8.
Do not rebuke an older man harshly.
I'll read that again.
Do not rebuke an older man harshly. So that means you can rebuke him, just don't be mean about it?
Well, if he's wrong, you can tell him he's wrong, but don't beat him over the head with a 10-pound Bible.
That's my job.
It didn't say do not rebuke, it said do not rebuke harshly.
Right. But exhort.
Grumpy old men can hurt you.
Sure can. I used to work in the nursing home. But exhort him as if he were your father. Treat younger men as brothers, older women as mothers, and younger women as sisters with absolute purity. Give proper recognition to those widows who are really in need. But if a widow has children or grandchildren, these should learn first of all to put their religion in practice by caring for their own family, and so repaying their parents and grandparents, for this is pleasing to God. The widow who is really in need and left all alone puts her hope in God and continues night and day to pray and ask God for help. But the widow who lives for pleasure is dead even while she lives. Give the people these instructions so that no one may be open to blame. Anyone who does not provide for their relatives, and especially for their own household, has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever.
Okay. Everybody got that? What is now he's talking to Timothy about how to manage the church. Okay? And he's in verse 1, he says, do not rebuke older men harshly. Of course, this is in a Jewish context. If he were writing it in America, he would say, he'd probably say, do not rebuke older people harshly. But in a Jewish context, the women were more or less property. You don't see them referred to very much in the Bible because of the context in which the Bible was written. But you see in many places where Paul lifts up women or gives what's the word there? Exhorts women, lifts them up, gives them credit for what they did. This is not how Paul feels, but this is how the world was back then. He's not endorsing it, he's just writing it in a context that would not cause a explosive argument. I don't agree with that, but it's history and it's over, and we learned from it, and we did better. Okay, why not rebuke older men harshly? Why just older men?
Well, the older I get, the grumpier I get. If you're going to come at me for something I did wrong, don't do it meanly. You're going to want to do it with a little bit of honey. Yeah.
If I come at you with an issue and I come at you aggressively, what's your response going to be?
Defense.
Yeah.
Huh?
Defensive.
You're going to push back.
Right.
And then I'm going to have to push back in order to hold my ground, and then you're going to push back some more, and nothing's going to be accomplished. Secondly, what is the context set here in verse 1 and 2? What is our relationship within the fellowship, within the church?
Family.
Family. How would you approach your mother? How would you approach your father? Well, you should approach me the same way. And I might be wrong. I've been wrong 4 times. We've established that.
Fact check.
Are you still here? You know, Sometimes I'm wrong, but when you approach me and correct me, and you should, if, you know, sometimes people just have a slip of the tongue. They're thinking one thing and they say another. That ever happened to you? And then all of a sudden you realize, what did I say? That wasn't what I meant to say. It happens. But you shouldn't walk up to them and say, well, you're going to hell. That's not going to open the door to any kind of reconciliation or to any kind of correction. That's going to open the door to an argument. And secondly, we should have a family relationship. If you have a need, it should be my need as well. And we do that pretty good as a church. These hogs. A lot of people have given up a lot of hours to, and it didn't take any meat, didn't need any meat, didn't want any meat, but they had a compassion and they had the heart to help someone who did need some meat. And it's called the gift of helps. And it comes and goes. You might not do anything for quite a while because there's no need. Then all of a sudden COVID comes along and the government drops everybody's unemployment by half or a third, and they need help. And then, but every time we've done this, we've had enough help every single time. Any more would there'd have been people standing around doing nothing, fellowshipping, and that's fine. But we had what we needed to get the job done and to get the job done early. And you can't say that about most churches. Especially something like, well, we're butchering hogs Saturday, get your knife and come over. Most people would look at you like, I mean, you know, the Himalayan rabbit thing, most people don't have a thing for, don't have a thing for dead animals. They don't mind pork chops on a grocer's shelf, but they really don't want to see a half a hog hanging in front of their face and they have to cut it up. They want somebody else to do the dirty work for them.
You should see people coming in the
different.
driveway.
This church shows up, the job gets done, the job gets done very well, and a lot of people are blessed. And there's a whole truck full of meat out there for you this morning if you want to try it. There's another thing here that is, as sisters with absolute purity. What's going on there? Said other men as brothers, older women as mothers, younger women as sisters, with absolute purity. What's he trying to say?
He's keeping lust out.
Hmm?
He's keeping lust out. Lust.
Yeah. You know, younger women can be a big temptation. Not because of the women, but because of the guys, frankly. It can be a big temptation. Billy Graham would not get onto an elevator alone if there was a woman on the elevator. He'd take the next one because he didn't want to be alone in an elevator with another woman and set up a situation where there could be claims made. He'd just wait for the next elevator. Not a bad idea. I don't have single women's phone numbers on my phone. If I need to call Jennifer, I ask Janice what the number is. I don't have single women's phone numbers on my phone. Not that I'm worried about them or they should be worried about me, but why set up a situation where temptation can come along and cause problems. When we teach at Bible school and stuff, there has to be another adult in the room. I can't be in there alone with a bunch of kids and set up a situation. You know, at first you can take that as, why, don't they trust me? But if you think about it, it's really the right thing to do. Because In the last couple of years in Washington, I think everybody up there has been accused of sexual impropriety. Maybe they did, maybe they didn't, but a lot of those cases have been proved to be false. And if you're not covered by another witness or by some kind of a safeguard, it's going to be your word against theirs, and who are they going to believe? The juiciest story gets the stage, right? Yeah, the juiciest story gets the stage. Even when I go down to, we had to change Wanda's hot water heater, but I made sure there was somebody else there so that I wasn't there alone with Wanda. Now, there's nothing gonna happen between me and Wanda, but still, the neighbors are looking, and the neighbors are watching, and they're gonna say, wow, he went in an hour and a half ago and he hasn't come out. I wonder what's he doing in there? Because people will talk. People will talk. Okay, now if you go down to the next part, give proper recognition to those widows who are really in need. What's he trying to say? There's three kinds of widows in this passage of Scripture. Three of them. Okay. And well, it's going to carry on to the next part too. But there are widows who are under 60. There are widows who are over 60. And the widows who are over 60 are broken into two parts. The widows that are requesting and need help, and the widows who are have not requested help. Okay. Under 60, back then, they didn't have Social Security. They didn't have a welfare system. They didn't have food stamps. Women didn't own property. And if their husband died, the property went back to the family. And the family, if they liked you, may allow you to stay in the house, or they may say, your husband's gone, you don't have any children, you're on your own. That's the way the society was. That's not the way the society should have been, but that's the way the society was. That's the way it was.
Even a few generations ago.
You had the widows under 60, and there was a list in the church of the widows that had applied for the assistance of the church. And those widows were, in all essence, married to the church. That's how it was. We will take care of you. We will provide for you. But you are married to the church now. And then there are widows who are over 60 who might want to get remarried in life. They might want another husband in the physical world. And those widows were not put on the list of widows in need. They were not a responsibility of the church. Now, if you go to Acts chapter 4, it says that they met daily, broke bread, and studied the Word of God. So the church would meet daily, and there would be a meal, because a lot of people, there was a time of persecution, and a lot of people had lost their job. A lot of people had lost their land because they were worshiping Jesus Christ, and the society at the time said, look, renounce Jesus Christ or we're going to take your land. Was it legal? No, not according to the Old Testament, but it was the climate of the day, and they did it. And so they'd be kicked out. They wouldn't have anywhere to go. Well, not only did the church meet daily, they met daily for two reasons, because it was brand new church, it was a brand new theology, and they were trying to get everybody educated as fast as they possibly could so that they could be mature Christians and could work out with the ministry. All right? Secondly, yeah, what is secondly? Where are they going with this?
They ate.
Hmm?
They taught, but they also ate. I think you were going.
Yeah. And they provided a meal. Now, the widows who didn't want to be, on the register would have that meal every day. But they were expected to serve the tables, to help with the preparation of the food, to get things ready. Everybody had a job to do. And Paul says later on in another epistle, he says, you don't work, you don't eat. So if you wanted to show up and sit around the corner and gossip and not help set tables or not help wash dishes or not help cook, when it came time to be served, they wouldn't serve you. You were expected to be a productive member of that society. And so you had the widow who was totally dependent upon the church for a place to live, for a place to sleep, and for all of their food. And then you had the widows who didn't want to be on the roster because they wanted to actually look for another mate, to be married again. There's a good example of it in Luke chapter 2. What did you say?
These two
Ding
are
dongs. They're dumb.
Okay. Luke chapter 2, 36. And read down to through 38. Luke chapter 2, 36 through 38. Anyone?
There was a prophetess Anna, the daughter of Phanuel, the tribe of Asher. She was very old and had lived with her husband for 7 years after her marriage. And then as a widow to the age of 84, she did not leave the area of the temple, but was serving and worshiping night and day with fasting and prayers. She too came up at that very moment and began praising and giving thanks to God, and continued to speak of him to all who were looking for the redemption and deliverance of Jerusalem.
Okay. Anna was a widow that had been married for 7 years. Now, it didn't tell us what age she got married. But after she had been married for 7 years, her husband died, and she became a ward of the church. She went on the roster of the temple. She lived in the temple. She cleaned the temple. She did whatever needed to happen in the temple. And for all practical purposes, she was considered, and she considered herself to be a bride of God, or a bride of, it wouldn't be Christ back then, but it would be a bride of God. She was married to God. Her commitment was to God. She would be like a present-day nun in a Catholic church that's functioning properly. And she would be provided for by the temple, but she would be expected. It said she never left the temple. She was there 24 hours a day and had been there for decades. She was a committed member of the temple. Now, temple wasn't a church like this. It was like 4 city blocks. It was a huge operation. And hundreds and thousands of people went through there all the time. There were a lot of women like her that the temple supported, that the temple fed and provided for, and give shelter to. But they had to commit themselves as a wife would commit herself to her husband. Now, what's the consequences of that if 10 years down the road she meets a guy and decides she wants to get married?
She has to break her vow to God.
She broke her vow to God, and she was living in adultery. That's how they saw it. I'm not saying that's the way it should have been. I'm saying that's how they saw it. So when she made that commitment, she was saying, I will be married to God until God dies. And God's not going to die anytime soon. So she made a commitment, a lifetime commitment, and it was a marital type of commitment. And we see that in the Bible when we see that Jesus Christ comes back, and he comes back to get his bride, as a bridegroom descending from heaven to receive his bride unto him, and we rise to meet him into the sky. And at that point, we will be considered to be the bride of Christ. Now, the other option was to say, look, I'll come over and eat and I'll help out as much as I possibly can. But I would like to be married again, so I don't want to be on the roster. I don't want to be on the rolls. I'll make out the best I can. I will, but I want to have a husband again. Right. Then you've got the one under 60, and Paul says, don't put them on the roster. Why?
Because they're most likely,
They're most
Right.
likely going to look for a
Yeah.
husband. They're most likely not going to want to be alone. They're still younger. They're still 30, 40, 50 years old. And they didn't have Match back then, but they may have been, they may have the desire to have a husband again. To not live the rest of their life alone and without companionship. And so Paul says they're still younger, they haven't reached that stage of life where they're feeble and dependent, and so they should not be put on the roster. And then if they do find somebody that they desire to be remarried to, they'll be free to do it. All right. Any questions? What do you think of that system?
It's not very romantic Valentine's-y.
I'm sorry, take it.
It's not great for Valentine's Day.
Oh, it is Valentine's
Maybe it
Day.
is.
Wow.
Maybe it is great for Valentine's Day.
Well, it was the welfare system of that day. Which do you think worked better, the welfare system of today or the welfare system of that day?
that day.
That day.
That day. Why?
Because you worked for what you exchanged your work for food, shelter, and
You were expected
Yeah.
to earn what you received, okay? Well, why else?
Because people took care of each other. People
You-
took care of their families.
Right. This was a family situation. They were like your sisters. They were like your mother. And you had a whole different attitude toward providing for them. Being the postmaster of a small town is both a blessing and a curse. Because you see who all gets the checks and you see what all they do with it. And it's like, grr, you know. And you can't say a word about it because you cannot discuss with anybody the contents of people's mail. You can't. So whatever your opinions are, but I can tell you that the system we have is sorely abused. And why is that?
people feel entitled.
Hmm?
People feel entitled.
People feel entitled.
Government's took God out of it.
God's out of it, so we don't have an instruction manual for it. And there's no local control. You think Washington, D.C. has any idea what's going on in French Lick, Indiana? Do you think they care? Okay. Now, back then, we don't see any situation where there's failure, where Social Security ran out of money. We don't have any historical record of that kind of stuff whatsoever. What is the biggest expense in Washington, D.C. today?
Their paychecks. Their paychecks.
Yeah. That's kind of a welfare program too, because what work do they do to earn? But bottom line is, what is the situation in, what is the big expense in government today? It's not foreign aid, it's not the military, it is social programs. Those are our biggest expenses. And a lot of them are abused. Back then, the church was overseeing everybody. They personally knew who was getting what. They knew who was shirking and not showing up to set the tables or prepare the food. They knew if there was abuse or if there was disobedience, and they dealt with it. Washington D.C. can't do that. Indianapolis can't do that. They got bigger fish to fry. We're in 1 Timothy chapter 5. The widows were taken care of, and they were taken care of well, but they were taken care of according to a set of guidelines that worked. And they were taken care of as family. Remember verse 1. All these people were looked at as mothers and grandmothers. And, you know, if your grandmother was struggling, would you show up? Oh, I need to see it.
Yes.
Okay? You know, we would. Now, if we have that same attitude toward the people in the church who have need, and this church does have that attitude. They do. A lot of good stuff gets done in this church. Mike Weiss told his church one time what we were doing, and I think we were putting on a roof. And his pastor over north and west of here, his pastor said, I don't think we want to get that started. What are we here for? We're here to help people who have need and show them the love of God. We're not here to preach at them on Sunday morning, beat them over the head with the Bible, send them home and be quiet. We're here to love them, aren't we?
Yeah.
Well, what happens when we turn it over to the government or turn it over to Washington, D.C.? You know, used to, when I went to school, there was a little schoolhouse on every section. There was one teacher for the schoolhouse, and we all got a great education. Do you want to hear me do my alphabet backwards? Mrs. Merkel taught me to know my alphabet backwards, forwards, inside out, and outside in. And I can still do it.
Bree wants to hear it. She said yes. She said yes. She wants to hear you say it backwards.
CYXWVU TSR QOP NMLK JIH GFED CBA. Want to hear inside out? MNLOKP. Nobody was telling us how to educate our kids. Do the kids in New York City need the same education that the kids on a farm in French Lake need? Do they?
Probably.
Yeah, that was a loaded question. But the kids in an urban society need to know different things. And if they're going to live there, and if they're going to work there, and if they're going to set up a life there, they need different things than the kids in a rural society. And it should be up to the school district of Mitchell or Orleans or French Lick to decide what's right for our community and our children and to get them ready for life in French Lick. Now, that doesn't mean there's anything wrong with college education, but there's also nothing wrong with trade schools either. Trade schools have put a lot of people on the road to prosperity. And for some people, that's what they should be prepared for. That's what they should do. Other people need to teach, and they need to go to a university, and they need to become skilled in some discipline. Like I have a minor in earth sciences, and I have a minor in math, and I have a minor in biology. I didn't get a major in anything. But the education should fit the situation and the needs of that particular community. You can't just say, this is what's right for everybody. My daughter went to Milligan and they said, well, the first 2 years she's going to learn about art, and she's going to learn about music, and she's going to learn how to ride a horse. And I said, wait a minute, this is $25,000 a year and she's going to be doing what? Well, after 2 years I said, Rian, pick a major. She said, well, I said, Rion, you pick a major or I'll pick one because I'm paying for it. And she picked a major and ended up making $75 an hour. But a lot of colleges are saying, well, what they're doing, it seems to me like they're trying to stretch it from 4 years to 6 and get extra money. But that's that particular university, and that's certainly not all of them.
Yeah, it is.
But some people need to go for 8 years, like doctors. You want a doctor working on you that's got an associate degree from Indiana Tech? No, me either. But it should be up to the local people to decide how their children are going to be educated. And Washington, D.C. shouldn't be telling us how to do it. How did Washington, D.C. get the job?
We let them.
We gave it to them. The farmers said, well, we don't really want to farm that 40 acres anymore. We don't have time to do that 40 acres. And that 40 acres that school was sitting on, the profits from that crop that all the farmers went in and planted and reaped, all that money went for to sustain the school, to buy books, to pay the teacher, to provide heat and electricity for the building. All that was paid for by that 40 acres. Well, we said, well, you know, we don't have time to do that anymore. We don't want to do that anymore. And we turned it over to the government, and now we have what we have. I think it could work better if the local people were more in charge. Steve, what do you think? It's time to go. We will pick up with question number 3. Well, question number 4. We've done 1, 2, and 3 now.